nuclear fusion. What is fusion? Well, fusion, to fuse something, means to join together. And again, don't hybridize it with fission. There's one S in fusion. Now, nuclear fusion means the joining together of two smaller atomic nuclei to make one larger nucleus. In certain circumstances, it releases energy if the relative atomic mass of the new nucleus is no more than 55, which is the mass of an iron atom. So that's the condition in which energy is released. To create bigger atoms than this, then energy must be supplied. It's very difficult to fuse nuclei in a laboratory because so much energy is needed. And the other problem is that nuclei have a positive charge. So if you're trying to get two nuclei to join together, then naturally they repel each other. But it does take place in the Sun. In the Sun, fusion of hydrogen nuclei, which is basically protons, forms helium and releases energy. So here's an example of a fusion reaction. Deuterium and tritium, both of these are isotopes of hydrogen, fuse to form a helium nucleus, and one neutron is emitted. So let's talk about the life cycle of stars then. Now, the initial formation of stars takes place when enough dust and gas from space is pulled together by its own gravity. Everything has gravity. Now, this is called a protostar. There are no fusion reactions yet. Stars themselves are balls of gas which are held together by their own gravity, which emit light energy. And the difference between stars and planets is that planets just reflect light from elsewhere. They don't emit their own light energy. Now, this energy comes from nuclear fusion reactions. This is when hydrogen and other light atoms fuse together. Stars then enter what's known as the main sequence. Now, in this, the star is constantly squeezed inwards by its own gravity. But this is balanced by forces pushing outwards from the heat. So this part of the star's life cycle is stable. Now, the length of the main sequence depends upon how much hydrogen is available. The more hydrogen is available, the longer the main sequence. Now, when the hydrogen runs out, then all those nuclear reactions end. And the next phase depends upon the size of the star. If the star's the same size as our Sun, then it'll swell, it'll cool down, and it'll turn red. It's now known as a red giant. And when fusion completely stops, the red giant collapses in on itself. It'll heat up again, and then it becomes white hot, and it's known as a white dwarf. And then eventually it'll cool down completely when it's known as a black dwarf. If the star is bigger than our Sun, it'll swell and turn red when it's known as a red supergiant. And then they'll collapse suddenly, and this causes a huge explosion known as a supernova. The core of the star will be compressed further. It will either turn into a neutron star, or if it's sufficiently massive, it'll become a black hole. So you should be familiar with the life cycle of a star, and you should be familiar with a diagram that looks like this, starting with the protostar, then going into the main sequence star, and then depending on the size of the star, one of either of those two pathways. Now, how are heavier elements formed during a star's life cycle? Heavier means heavier than hydrogen. Now, any element up to the relative atomic mass of iron can be formed in the main sequence phase of a star's life cycle. But if it's heavier than iron, then that's formed in a supernova. And the elements will be distributed throughout the universe when the supernova occurs.